in antiquity, in the ancient world, during Africa's first golden age, if you want to find slavery anywhere, you have to look outside of continental Africa and take a guess. Where do you think you have to look? I'm sure y'all gonna guess right. Rome, you say? Of course. Who else? Who else? Greeks and the Romans. And look at the extent to which slavery was a part of that civilization. And we already talked about the Carthaginians. Hannibal had the Romans on their heels to an extent that the Romans completely liberated the slaves in their country, offering them citizenship just to replenish their troops. Okay? They had a society that was based on slavery. It was a slave society, not a society with slaves. All right? Greeks, you can see the Greeks had slaves in every household. Another society that was dependent on the labor of slaves. And of course, what I'm saying, when I'm talking about slaves, I'm talking about a legal category, all right? An object, property, chattel. That is what I'm talking about, not simply a servant. They had slaves. Now the Ma'afa, our great disaster. One can say then that it really began when the Syrians came in. Actually, I would take it back a little bit further than that. When they came in, when Mary Carey and all of them talked about the presence of Asians in Kemet way back in the Old Kingdom. You know, I think that was the beginnings, when they began to come into Africa. The intense Ma'afa began when the Arabs came into continental Africa. I know we have several brothers and sisters today that are Muslims and proud Muslims, not trying to beat up on Islam. Islam is born of African spirituality, all right? But you can see the Arabs colonized Egypt in 639 AD. 639 AD. Today, when you look across Northern Africa, you see several Arab people. In fact, there are more Arabs in continental Africa today than there are in Arabia today. All of those Arabs that you see, Libya, Egypt, etc., they had not always been there. This is when they came, relatively recently. And we already talked about last time the conflict between traditional African spirituality and Islam. All right. So what we're seeing now is the consequence of the collapse of Carthage. When the Carthaginian Senate didn't want to send troops to support Hannibal. The collapse of Songhai, right? When the leadership began to sacrifice traditional religion, traditional spirituality to establish ties with Muslims, with the Arab population. When the Congo, as I mentioned to you last time, the Congo Kingdom even, when a son who was not in line to become king allied himself with Portuguese in order to ensure his ascendance to the throne. All of that dispensing with traditional African religion, traditional African spirituality, I should say, traditional African cultural norms. Dispensing with that is what ultimately weakened us and enabled the Ma'afa to begin. Now, as I said, Africans were not selling themselves. If you look at the beginning, what do you see? You see Arabs coming in and kidnapping African people. The first source, 10th century, and when I say 10th century, I mean 10th century AD. And it says, the Arabs, quote, steal their children, talking about the Africans, enticing them away by offering them fruits. They carry the children from place to place and finally take possession of them and carry them off to their own country. Now, when I read that, I said, well, how naive must those children have been, right? So if we haven't gotten the memo, why should they, a child 1,100 years ago, why should they have been able to foresee that? Also, and a Chinese scholar, now I don't know to what extent y'all know this, but the Chinese interacted with East Africa for hundreds of years, be up to 1421. All right. And here what the Asian scholar, the Chinese scholar had to say. African women were, quote, clean and of proper behavior, and the Arabs make frequent raids upon them. And there are other sources other than these that I have listed, right? So what they did was what they always have done. They attacked the fringes of African civilizations. And this trade across the Sahara, now of course Sahara means Great Desert. The lines that you see extending throughout northern and northwestern Africa is trans-Saharan trade. When that began, it had absolutely nothing to do with the institution of slavery or the objectification of human, even the exchange of humans as servants. Had nearly everything to do with the oil, with the gold in West Africa and salt in the desert that the West Africans needed for preservation of food and things like that. And it was that way for a millennia, all the way up to midway through the 14th century. However, the Arab infiltration changed all of that. I want to point out some areas to you. Here's Crete, the island of Crete, the island of Cyprus, Venice. This is the Adriatic Sea. And in the northwest part of the Adriatic Sea is the city-state of Venice, although it's not written on the map. Venice, and Venice is important to remember. If you go further west, you will see Spain. On the western border of Spain is the country of Portugal. Now, obviously, northwardly is Europe. The southern part of the Mediterranean is Africa, not the Middle East, Africa. To the east is Asia. So this is an intersection, an intercommunication zone between three different continents. A range of people interact within the Mediterranean. Now, things were beginning to change somewhat. And one of the distinctions that I want to make is the distinction between slavery in the ancient world and slavery in the modern world. And that's an important distinction to make. You can see both are highly nationalistic, meaning the people who are perpetuating this are powerful, influential states in antiquity, the Romans and the Greeks. In the modern era, the French people or the English people. Major difference here is at the bottom. The modern era, there's not so much a preoccupation with empire. That is rhetoric. The whole idea of empire is rhetoric in the modern era of history. What's going on is the preoccupation with capital accumulation. Capital accumulation for whom? Capital accumulation for the state as a whole? Capital accumulation for the workforce? No. Capital accumulation for the capitalist class. So when you talk about our Ma'afa in the modern era of history, you cannot discuss it without discussing its relationship with the growth of modern capitalism. So that's where we have to go next.
Learn the secrets that were excluded from your history books. Join the Kemet 101 educational tour to Egypt with Dr. Kerry Kiles. Explore inside the Great Pyramids of Egypt. Walk in the path of the ingenious Lady Pharaoh Hatshepsut and the brave warrior Ramses II. Experience this archaeological journey and spiritual retreat. Click the link in the description box and join our next Kemet 101 educational tour.